Okay. Welcome back. And let me just start by saying that this is not the last panel. This might be the most interesting panel for what we're going to talk about, but it's not the last time. What we have after this panel, we have the launch of the Brookes Creative. So we'll be talking about how sort of students can work with the creative industries. And then we have drinks and a reception at the end. So stick with us. My name is Daniela Traverick. I'm a member of staff at the School of Arts at Brookes, and I am the chair of the Creative Industry Research and Innovation Network. I'm really pleased to chair this session. I was trying to count the years, but I don't think I will, but plenty of experience in the creative industries. And I'm just going to introduce my panelists. MG Harris, author of the very successful children book series, The Joshua Files, translated in 17 languages. Amazing success. Wonderful. And a local. I mean, I think that there's a local connection. I think we're bringing it back to Oxford, and we'll talk a little bit about the future of the creative industries in Oxford. Caroline Jones, after 25 years in leading cultural organizations, now the director of the Story Museum. Thank you, Caroline, for being with us. Claire Barry, a television line producer that worked in you name it television, and she did work there, but currently she's one of the founders of the Oxford Technology and Media Network, and I'd really like to talk a little bit more about that. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about the future of the creative industries. Brian Mitchell, independent digital content producer, previously head of production at Rebellion Studios, and involved, I've sort of given up after halfway through the list of all the productions it's been involved in. Yeah, from start to finish, from epic movies to very small art projects. So thank you very much. What we're really doing, we talked about the role of the creative industries in the local economy, what it means for local communities. We looked at sort of potential, the creative potential of the city, and how perhaps a gamification of research-led initiatives can benefit the area. But I think that now my panelists have got the task to look at their crystal balls and think a little bit about the future. What are we thinking when we think about the creative industries, obviously of your area of expertise, in 10 years' time? What does Oxford and the region looks like in 10 years, or what we wish it would look like in 10 years, and what do we make sure? I think I want this session to be also a bit of a list of action points, just a way in which we can move forward and perhaps collaborate. We've got universities representative, we've got creative industries, we've got cultural organizations. And I think it'd be really, really good if we could come up with some ideas that we could move forward in for the future, and maybe get the results in the next 1 or 2 years when we meet together. So I will move and join them. Sorry, I'm a bit, because my microphone is just here, but yeah, so just to start you off is, let's think about your particular area of expertise. Where do we want it going in 10 years' time? Who wants to start?
I can start, if you like.
Yes, please.
So I'm a book writer, basically. I write novels, children's books, teenage books. And that means that what I actually practice... Oh, can I put it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
In practice, I sit at home in a room quietly on my own, writing, making things up, basically. That's what I do. And then I do have a little bit of interaction with publishers, and more recently with, well, we'll talk about that later. Where the publishing industry is going in this time, I'm a writer, I'm not a publisher, so I'm not the right person to necessarily ask about publishing. The third thing that's happening, and I'd like to see happen more, is independent publishing. So that is when authors themselves, we used to call it self-publishing, but it's done quite professionally now. So if you want to self-publish a book or set up your own publishing company, or as happened to my case, some of my book rights reverted, so I got them back, and then I hired a professional designer and professional editor, and put them out again. That's happening more and more, and you're getting authors who are, selling millions now. I mean, not really. There's some authors who sell millions. They do write a lot, though. You need to have a very high churn rate. So all of this is causing publishers to keep sort of going, woe is us, but really, only woe is us if your model for publishing is expensive buildings in London, staffed by, nice white girls from posh families. That is something that, publishers are starting to want to move away from. Not that there's anything wrong with, my editors are, tend to be nice white girls from London. But people aren't standing for that. People are saying, where are the alternative voices? So it's got to be significant that last year, I think it's Publisher of the Year, Children's Publisher of the Year was Knights Of, which is a publishing company set up from some people of colour and diverse publishing professionals who set it up sort of virtually to start with, and now they've won this prize, and they have a Stone Book of the Year. I think I might be wrong about that, but certainly they've had award-winning books. That's where it's going, and I want to see more of that. I would like to see Random House and or Penguin Random House and all of those big publishers move out of London. Get it out of London, because then maybe other people can enter the profession. Because you have to live in London, and you're only going to get paid, £26,000 a year. Who's doing those jobs? Only people with, independently wealthy people, basically. So that's where I'd like to go.
I'm sure we'll come back to some of the issues that you sort of mentioned. Caroline, tell us a little bit about, obviously the Story Museum has evolved, and how is that sort of storytelling changed, and
so
how
I think
is it going to
the
change?
good news, when you think about the future of storytelling, which sounds terribly again, is that stories have been around for a while and they're not going anywhere. So what we deal with at the Story Museum is stories in all forms. So we have collected 1,001 stories pulled from across the world and through time, featuring written stories, starting of course with oral stories, written stories, stories on stage, on screen, in digital form. The thing I keep coming back to, and I'm no less excited than the idea of putting Canterbury Tales in interactive medium online and that being used in an education context. What really gets me going is the very simple act of telling a story and watching the beautiful thing that happens between particularly young children, but children of all ages. And at the museum, we're particularly looking at that 0 to 18. We call that a story child. Our vision is that all children should grow up rich in stories. Coincidentally, 1001 is about one story a week between the age of 0 and 18, which is a neat coincidence. And what happens to a young child's brain as early as 0, 1, 2, when they are hearing a story? So reading a story versus hearing a story in Audible is a sort of different, it's a transposition of one story form into another. The act of telling a story in nursery rhyme form, song form, moving to a picture book. You asked us to think about the dominance of visual stories versus oral storytelling. The most powerful storytelling is when you've got both together. You only have to look at a 4-year-old being led through, or indeed leading themselves through, a picture book to understand that the words and the pictures working together are the best kind of story form for that young forming brain. What's happening at age 3 to 4 in terms of language acquisition, what's happening between 5 to 7 in terms of foundational literacy. And of course, if you're not a reader by 7, it takes a very long time to regain that skill and to catch up. October 21, 50% of reception intake children were not considered school ready, which is a bit of an indictment on anybody that's been working, particularly in early years. The pandemic's only exacerbated that situation. What stories can do in terms of those foundational oracy, leading to literacy, leading to independent motivation to read, again, shown to be the best possible indicator of a later fulfilled life, whatever that might be. Independent motivation to read is absolutely critical. So what we do at the museum is create early emotional engagement with stories. So we don't start with books, because a book is quite often a barrier, whether English is an additional language, whether the book is just not something that's accessible to you or available to you. We start with the words. So the good news is that's not going anywhere. That's it for me.
Quite a lot.
Well, good.
Right.
Okay, so I suppose my background is all digital and all visual, and working mainly with motion capture, which is sort of character animation. And a lot of the work I've done is either in games industry or film industry. Very different area to come from. But I think one of the key things, or one of the things you've seen a lot of, I guess, or when you talk about the stuff I work with, is things like, I don't know, Marvel and DC and like all those big budget things that really lean heavily on the effects and the explosions, and have to be a bigger explosion than last time and all the rest of it. And I think the nice thing, or I'm hoping that I can sort of take this sort of tech really more back to the storytelling and let the story lead the visual, I suppose. And that's kind of key, I think, is, you know, when you're working with sort of like VFX producers and people like that, you know, obviously they want to sort of show off what they can do in terms of sort of like their expertise, I suppose, that type of thing. But the story has got to be strong enough and take you through, whether it's a game or a film or whatever it is. So I always try and sort of bring the focus back on the actual narrative and the story and the characters and all that kind of thing, because that's the bit people want to be sort of drawn into, because then you're absorbed by it. If it's just lots of explosions, well, that's, you know, great, but you know, that's all it is. You know,
There's something you need to see that is just,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think the key thing for me is like, because as soon as I sort of talk about like visual effects and things, I see people maybe glaze over it maybe and just think, oh yeah, it's going to be all that kind of stuff. But it's bringing back to the sort of subtleties of the character and you know, what's going on in the story that you need to sort of work with, I suppose. So yeah, so I'm hoping we can really push that more and get more of that sort of the emotion through the performance as digital character.
Wow, my job as a line producer is actually to take everything those 3 people work in and then take it and deliver it to the audience. So storytelling, and funnily enough, I go into schools and talk to, you know, pre-GCSE people about what they can do, and I say television, everything in it is about storytelling. Even when I'm doing live sport, we're telling a story about what's happening at the event. The whole thing is storytelling, and it, technology-wise, it doesn't matter whether it's on film, whether it's digital, or how it's done. That's irrelevant. We're telling a story. So my job is to take the story from, you know, that say Peter has written or that you've got, and then think about how I put the technology together and the people together to make that happen. So that's literally, you know, hiring the crew, talking with the series producer about who they want, who they don't want, putting them together. At this very moment, I'm working on a series for Channel 4 called Living Wild with Sophie Morgan. And some of you may know her. She presented Crufts this year. She's presented Paralympics, and she's in a wheelchair. And so that the whole idea of the series is taking her to wild places, and are they accessible for someone in a wheelchair? So we had to make that work. We had to really sit down, and it took a lot of work and a lot of effort, because we went to islands off Scotland, we went to Colonsay, we went to Cape Clear in Ireland. They'd suddenly decided they wanted to go to the Scilly Isles in 2 weeks' time. I don't know if anyone knows the Scilly Isles, but everything there is booked from 1 year to the next. And if you want to find somewhere in 2 weeks' time to put someone in a wheelchair, it's bloody hard work. And the insurance company went, no, not taking that, because we couldn't get on the ferry. We couldn't get, the ferries are inaccessible for wheelchairs to the Scilly Isles. We had to hire a rib. And then we hired this rib, and the insurance company went, no, can't do that. And the man who drove it had 20 years experience, and they said, that's not enough experience. So I am having to do this. And literally, eventually, they said yes. So I'm taking the elements of the story, and I'm taking the practical elements, and I'm putting them together so that we can go and film it. So when you're talking about more accessibility, it's not just accessibility in front of the camera. And in fact, I've worked with Channel 4 on training for the 2012 Olympics for disabled people behind the camera, and for 2016 for Brazil as well. So Channel 4, absolutely fabulous the way they work, so that the Paralympics have people working on it who are disabled, as well as obviously being the athletes. And then that's gone on and on. They do a lot of training for people. But one of the things which you mentioned about publishing, which TV is notorious for, it being London-centric. It used not to be. I'm very, very old. I started in ITV in the regions. We had regional areas, and I worked at Anglia TV in Norwich, and we took local people. My boss went down to what was then the job centre and literally interviewed youngsters and brought them back and trained them. Then Maggie Thatcher threw ITV under a bus, and they all closed, and there was no local training, and it all stopped. So all local people like publishing. TV was notorious for being middle class, where people could afford to put their children in a flat in London while they weren't paid, while they worked as interns. Now, slowly that's beginning to change because we're running out of people. We do not have enough staff in TV. We cannot get staff because, of course, they haven't been trained. There isn't anyone. Channel 4 went out after the Olympics and all the Paralympics training, and we do these training sessions all over the country, and they bring people in and they guarantee them a job with a local company, whether it's Edinburgh, Glasgow, Northern Ireland, Exeter, Bristol, and they train them. Sky have now opened up their own academy to train people so that hopefully it will not be middle-class people. I worked on the European tour for 4 years, and it was notorious for having white males who had failed in the city, who daddy knew someone on the Gulf, who would send them to us. And I was then said, will you train them? And I'd go, will you pay me? And then, well, we're not going to pay you. I said, I'm not going to train. And we used to have, they were all, you know, we were a team of 100, and there would be me and maybe one other female, and they were all middle-class boys. We've got to stop that. The accessibility has got to be gender, as well as whether you're disabled or whatever. And it's got to go right out across the whole country because we're missing talent. You think of the people we're not getting because we're not opening it up. And I feel really passionate about this, about making TV production accessible for everybody. And, you know, when I go into schools and I say, right, I'm an old baggage, I'm going to stop soon and just disappear into a gin bottle. I want you lot to get out there because the jobs in TV are huge. If you go to Skillset website and just look at the amount of jobs and the variety, it's fantastic. And we really do need all of that. And in a funny way, OTMN, that was started here to make companies talk to each other, to make things more accessible and collaborative. I mean, you might want to come back to that later, but it all ties in, is guys, let's talk to each other and let's help the next generation.
So can I just, talking about collaboration, if we think about collaboration, do you talk to each other? Is it do you talk with other cultural organizations in the region? What is the conversation that you have with other production companies or part? I'm really interested in this idea of the cluster, you know, which is obviously something to think about and think about how the rural can then integrate with the city. What is the situation in other areas in relation to collaborative work? Because I think for us, from a university perspective, it's very difficult. It's probably the most difficult skill is to teach to work in collaboration with others. Group work is the hard bit, and it's really what happens. So can I just have other experiences of that collaborative work?
So it reminds me that the reports coming back from my learning team of spending time in classrooms but with children at the museum is that collaboration is one of the things that's been corroded for children. So if you ask a group of children to create a character between them or to design the sort of overarching narrative of the story between them, they just can't do it because they've been living in their very introspective worlds for so long, which is a nearly related point. Here in Oxford, it's a city rich in stories, and it's a city full of cultural and heritage organisations, several of whom are represented here today. I think prior to the pandemic, but especially through the pandemic, the conversations that were started in those kind of crazy chaotic months continue. Sometimes it's single issue, so the Oxford Anti-Racist Cultural Alliance is a single issue a group that's come together to tackle that very specific issue of diversity and representation within and without our organisations. The Oxford Arts and Cultural Network is a county-wide network. So by and large, they're sharing of information and practice. And as I said, pre-existing, but very especially useful and important when we were all in that very, in that lockdown set of mind. I think collaboration, full stop, is something that's easily said, and when it works, it's brilliant. It very readily doesn't work because the mutuality of what you're bringing to the table is the thing you have to map out very early on. I also think it's okay to be a little bit cynical sometimes with partnerships. We do a lot of work out in the community, and if you come to the table knowing I bring this, you bring this is more than transactional. It is a creative collaboration, but it's okay to leave the table at the end with something that you've gained. And sometimes it's quite nice to be honest about that.
Honesty, really important. And obviously, Julie, you write on your own, but you do collaborate. So what is?
I have, but I tell you, I'm unusual. I have to say, normally writers, especially children's writers, really only have a relationship with your editor. Pretty much, maybe the marketing people. You might have a meeting with them before you get launched, and they might tell you what they're going to do and ask you to do some things, and then we will do that. Generally, that's where it ends. I think I'm reasonably unusual. It has happened to some other writers I know, that in the late noughties, we had this whole fashion in the book industry, children's industry, using something called alternate reality games to promote books. Has anyone heard of an alternate reality game? Few people that's, basically you create a kind of another story on a bunch of interconnected websites that you maybe start with one, and it'll be the famous one was Lonely Girl 15 or something like 51, which was used to promote a big movie, AI. Anyway, we did this. I was involved in a collaboration with a game designer. He was kind of self-schooled. It wasn't a professional company. It was me, my literary agent got involved a little bit. It was very amateur hour, but we created a pretty cool little game, because it was really just a bunch of websites that were meant to look like websites, and then a chatbot, like a very crude version of what we saw in Charisma.ai, very, very crude version. But you chatted with someone, some websites that we went over here to get some clues, and there was a final, quite cool sort of Flash, if anyone remembers Flash experience. And so I got to be involved in that. This stuff never went nowhere. I know people whose books got marketed that way, and they spent the entire marketing budget on that, and then we had this cool game that 300 people played. 300 people isn't very many. So what do we learn from that? I think we learned that it's a lot of fun to collaborate and do some really cool stuff, but the readers were not particularly interested in those things. We're rather only a very thin wedge of readers at the we wanted that experience. Most readers of children's books want the book. They would love to see a TV film, a TV or film adaptation. Hopefully they might want an audio book. They don't seem to want much more. I'm also involved, maybe Claire wants to talk about this, in potentially working on a TV adaptation. But I'm being involved directly in that sense with the producer. That is not normally what happens. Most authors, their agents will sell the rights to, or have the rights option to developer, producer, and they really won't be involved at all. So again, I'm a bit atypical of that, and both of those things probably come because of my professional associations. Were with people who were not run-of-the-mill, like my literary agent was the one who had the idea for the game. He wasn't a very ordinary literary agent. He wouldn't be ashamed of that. He's very innovative. Oxford Technology and Media technology isn't very, that's not something that most authors are involved in either. So I would say yes, I have been involved in collaborations, I am involved in them, but that's not something that most authors would say. It should be. It's not how the model sets up, because we've got this literary agent in the middle who, usually they just say, here, these people want to option your rights, they want to do a game, sign on the dotted line, here's some money, goodbye. That hasn't been the case for me.
Okay, from a sort of business point of view, then I suppose game industry, film industry, that type of thing. I've sort of been involved in both over sort of many years, and through this motion capture. And what we've seen with the different types of client is, so game industry, film industry, they're always looking over the fence to see what the other one's doing, and slowly over the years they've sort of come closer and closer together. We're just at the point now where you've got like Unreal and Unity and all those kind of game engines, which people seem to be aware of now what they are. That's actually moving across into film industry as part of virtual production. So everybody uses Mandalorian as the example, which is the big LED wall and that kind of thing with a game engine environment on it. So it's a 3D environment as opposed to just a sort of a video plate. So that's got like depth in it. So when your camera moves around and your character's in the midground, you get parallax with the background because everything moves at a slightly different speed when you move. That's a really big thing right now in the film industry. It merges both industries together really nicely. Lots of skill share amongst that. And it really forces collaboration. And that's the bit I love about it, is because in the film industry, obviously it's very old and people sort of do their task and that's it. And then it's over to somebody else to do their task, I think. Games industry is sort of relatively young, very different way of working and so on. But the virtual production piece, really, people have to work together to make it work. You can't do it. Lots of people sort of think, oh no, we're going to go, that's a great idea, that's really shiny, we're going to go and do our own thing. You can't really do that unless you've got, unless you're ILM, Disney, whatever, and they're going to throw lots of money at it. But all the technology and the game engine and everything else is free to download, so it's accessible to everybody, all the students, youngsters, all that kind of thing. I have to keep telling my son, but he won't listen. But he loves playing the game, but I'm saying, like, you can actually get involved in actually creating it and making it, that kind of thing. So the software and all those things that really, I think, made it really hard for students and youngsters to get involved with were always really, really expensive and that kind of thing. Now it's free, it's there. And for me, it's all about sort of trying to encourage them to sort of want to make them realize that those opportunities exist. And there's lots of variation on those opportunities, because kids always say, oh yeah, I want to make games when I grow up, but they need to kind of understand, like, there's lots and lots of, like, a broad range of skills within that, like, sweeping statement type thing. So, and they're all there for them, but they just, somehow we need to sort of like take them on that journey a little bit. Like Claire, I know Claire goes into schools, talk about the TV production side. It's exactly the same for game or film, whatever, where kids just don't understand, my opinion, obviously, don't appreciate how many different roles and things there are available to them that they can actually start learning about or thinking about whatever at a much earlier age. I don't know if you want them to think about their career at that age, because they could still be children and go and have fun and play in the park or whatever, but it's all there. So yeah, we need to sort of get that across to create these sort of environments or hubs of whatever collaboration, getting kids involved in making things and creating things. Yeah.
I'm just going to pause on my sort of chairing role, just to give the opportunity to the audience to ask a couple of questions. I've got 2 more points that I really want to talk about, but just if there's anybody that has a burning question on some of the issues that we've been discussing. No? Yeah, 2, yes.
I'd like to ask what the panel thinks is the most immediate thing that can happen to catalyse some of the things you mentioned. So is that an organisation? Is it a funding? What is it? What is actually required for some of these things? What's the first stepping stone in your?
I would say collaboration, and I would say in Oxford we already have everything we need to make all these things happen, but people have got to talk to each other, and it's forming that. And we did form the Oxford Technology and Media Network back in 2008 for that reason, but it doesn't have to be that. Maybe the university, what Tash does, because the people are here, but what I realized is they didn't know they existed, that people would be going to London for the expertise they thought they wanted, but there's somebody here already that does it. And since 2008, that's grown. The North Oxford Technology Centre that's being built, we've sort of got involved in that, and they sponsored a few of our events. And what's going to grow out of that is very interesting, and what's happening. there are so many companies that are quite small or medium that already exist here. It's trying to get them to talk to each other. And I've been doing that since 2008, and I still don't have an answer, quite honestly. But I think one of the quite fun things is to run some fun events where you do have food and drink and chatting and something happening, and get people just to come in and stand around. And it's amazing how they start talking to each other. So that's kind of, I think it already exists. We don't need to throw lots more money at it. It's there. Perhaps we've just got to advertise it a bit more. I don't know. I don't know how you get people to come out. You know, get them to come out of their homes and do it.
One thing, sorry, no, we did a thing, we used to have a studio down in Wheatley, and we just did a thing with the local, it was like a Cub Scout group or whatever, real youngsters, and it was Halloween, and I can't remember how it even came about. I think somebody chatted to somebody locally in a shop or something. But we got the kids in, and we couldn't really put them in, so we did the motion capture suit with all the markers and all that kind of thing. You can't really do that with like a whole bunch of kids and so on, but what you could do is you could give them a hat, like a baseball cap with some markers on it, make them wear a hat, and then on each hat we associated like just got a whole bunch of props, like virtual props, so like a bat and a broomstick and a, you know, anything Halloween related, and just linked it to the hat, so they could just run around in the space. And on the screen, they could just see all these things floating around in space. It doesn't have to be that complicated to be fun, and just sort of start to understand it and things like that. And to be honest, if you put an actor in a suit and put a big screen on the wall where they can see themselves, it's exactly the same reaction as you get from a 5-year-old child. So, because you could just see yourself and you think, oh, that's me. Oh, and you start doing sort of really silly things. But so you get an instant reaction, and they're sort of absorbed into it straight away. So, I mean, like, obviously that's very sort of niche and very sort of like my industry only, and doesn't necessarily relate to other things. But I think just doing a few of those type of events really help just bridge that gap and get people just a little bit interested. Then they start looking into it a bit more and talking to people that are there and that kind of thing. So I'd give something like that workshops.
I think for me, there's something about alignment of purpose. And that for me is quite often about the audience you're trying to talk to. And actually funding is never not helpful. As an organisation that has to generate every pound we spend, we're a registered charity, we're a cultural enterprise, we have to earn or raise every single pound. I've got nothing spare to invest in something called research and development, and yet we're continually having to innovate and adapt and respond. So I'm always open for discussions about funding, and especially if there's an alignment, only if there's an alignment of purpose, particularly around children and young people.
There's another question.
Just interested about what you said, Brian, about the industry, like and especially with everything like so much more accessible terms of energy, really expensive now. Whether you expect accessibility lapse into the similar way that in especially with
Yeah, I think it does to a degree. I'm not a sort of specialist on some of these bits of software, but I believe Blender is free. Yeah, so I mean, you know, there's ways. You know, sometimes you have to be a bit creative, but I think you can. You know, there's definitely ways to get into those things, and I think almost well, depends who you are, where you're coming from, I guess, but getting into any of these pieces of software, you know, you almost need to, all you're looking to do is sort of create like your own, you know, a story, a show reel, a portfolio, you know, it just, as an employer, if you like, that if somebody brings you something they've created themselves, you know, you're not looking for really highly polished sort of Pixar, you know, you just want to see that they've got off the backside and actually done it and like experienced it and worked through the process, because, you know, that also gives you something, like I'm thinking in an interview scenario, but, you know, you can quite openly ask them about sort of what they come up against, how do they get past it, you know, they're demonstrating the fact they're sort of solving issues as they've created something. So from an employment point of view, I totally encourage anybody to sort of just get involved in those things, and even, you know, once you get almost like a foot in the door, your career or what you go on to do eventually might not be anything close to what you started out as, because as you get into these things, you'll discover other areas and things you're more interested in or whatever. But it's that first step, really. It's sort of like just getting you on the path, I think, is the key.
Might view it around health and well-being. So use your interface, your credibility, find a way of educating people around health and well-being, health, food, diet, exercise. All very that creates an opportunity for you to
I would start by saying nothing at the museum's traditional, because we've not even been running for 12 months yet, so everything is new. I'm attending a conference on Thursday run by GLAM, actually sharing some research around social prescribing. So I'm absolutely confident that there's something that we can do. We already work extensively with very young parents who are vulnerable or challenged in a number of ways, and they're very young children, because illiteracy is an intergenerational cycle that you have to break at naught age old. So that's a very definite part of our social mission. And already when working in partnership with schools, we have 24 partner schools across Oxford. I'm quite often seeking the funding in order to be able to deliver work that's free to access with those schools outside their pupil premium contribution. And that's particularly around supporting the PCSHE, I think that's the right acronym, which is entirely around well-being. And that's on top of the literacy, which also fortunately for us is not going to go out of fashion anytime soon. So yes, and I guess, yes, I'm being a bit facetious when I say I'm always up for funding, but what I do think is important for those of us on the charitable side to just be clear about what we have to invest in terms of the, you know, the pedagogy that we've developed, the approach that's distinctive to the museum isn't repeated anywhere else in the world, and what the value of that is. Otherwise, I'm just giving away my crown jewels for free. Yeah. Yeah.
And then my sector can work with you as well to take what you're doing and to perhaps open up in other areas, which, you know, Brian can do with VR and such like. So hence back to the collaboration, that there are things we can do together. And it's possible we could bring money to your projects from somewhere else. So that, you know, you have to talk about that, you know, all the time. So it all exists here. We've just got to make everybody talk to each other.
Hi, I was just wondering if anybody's doing any work around transformative narratives around the climate crisis, because I'm reading private wealth theory at the moment, talking about we need news stories that are future positive, not always being. So I'm guessing that would be a big urgent need in terms of health and well-being, planet, people, everything, and then the potential collaboration between gaming and storytelling and everything, because that's your young people who make these games, to write the stories potentially. So I'm wondering. It's like an urgent need, and I'm an architect, and I'm kind of seeing
well, I've had some friends who've written cli-fi, and I haven't got that because I think you know, it's a limited audience about horror.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
I know, right? Yeah. So then just to say, the cli-fi, because they were, I remember them saying, we've got to tell stories about how terrible and awful. And they published their stories about how terrible and awful, and they didn't. I mean, you know, they published and everything, but they didn't take off because, understandably.
Within the TV industry, getting those commissions is really difficult. Loads of people have come up with serious ideas on what they want to do. The only place at the moment we seem to be able to do it is through David Attenborough and wildlife, and that's not the only area. But the commissioners, because as you say, you can't get the audience for it. You can get 47 million people watching Strictly Come Dancing. I ran Unreported World for 5 years for Channel 4. We never ever got 1 million viewers once in those 5 years. So people, unfortunately, the audience won't listen, so they won't be commissioned. Yeah, exactly.
So Professor Catherine Hayhoe, Professor Catherine Hayhoe, she is an American professor of climatology or atmospheric chemistry, something to do with climate science, and she has this nice video YouTube channel of little videos explaining, and they're sort of quite jolly and quite positive and explaining what can be done. So I think that kind of approach is probably better, but that's already for people who want to engage. So Cli-Fi was about smuggling in, oh no, the horror, you know, but again, people were shying from it. I would say if you want to have a positive view of the future, there's always Star Trek. Star Trek is now our kind of, you know, gold standard. What about if we had a future where we'd solve climate problems and all of the planet Earth was united and, you know, human beings at least were all together in fellowship? It doesn't get better than Star Trek. I've never seen any utopian story that gets better than that. That's what we're thinking.
But what's the difference between what you're saying and what you're saying? There's this gap. We're bring together. You need
fellowship that the books and the narratives I'm reading are about nature.
Well, in Star Trek, the point is in Star Trek, human beings have solved that problem. So all the problems have come from outside of human society. They're always with aliens or different races, whatever. Otherwise, there'd be no drama. But the point is that if you want to see a society, a human society, or a human majority society, it exists, and it is Star Trek, which is huge, you know, narrative universe now. And
I think what you have to do, there's a film called 2040. I don't know if you've seen it. You have? Or you haven't? Okay. It was an Australian journalist who did it, who looked at his young children and said, fuck me, Australia's on fire, what the hell are we going to do? And then he said, right, I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to go out and look for good stories. So he went around the world to see what the world is doing for climate change and what people can do. And I think that's the narratives that we should actually be looking at is, okay, we're in this position, we've got to stop it. But what he did was he went and he saw projects that were already working. I think it was Pakistan or somewhere like that, where locally people have put PV on their roofs. They're stopped, they can now light their houses. They've stopped using those terrible paraffin, the lamps and all that sort of thing. But also they integrated all the PV. So everyone in the village could pump electricity to each other's houses. And so the whole village could be electrified. When I looked into doing it in this country, it's illegal because the electricity companies won't allow you to do it because I have PV on my roof and I thought, what if we all did that? So anyway, he went out and there are a load of projects and it's a very interesting film because the idea is let's go out and look at what exists. What can we all bring back to our community and make work? And I think we have to start in our communities. That's the narrative I would like to put out there. But I honestly don't know how you get it out there when nobody will commission it.
I tell you who is interested, and it's children and young people. And they're the people that will ultimately be imagining this better world into being, not to get too super meta about it. So next April the 22nd on Earth Day, the Story Museum will launch our year-long inquiry called Stories to Save the World. And that's doing exactly what you're describing, and it's equipping children with the skills to be the voices that we're going to need to tell this better world into being. Otherwise, unfortunately, the gloomy stories is the stories that we're all hearing, and actually the anxiety that that's giving children and young people is really, really damaging and a massive issue. So, so let's talk. I'd love to talk more about it.
Brian, can I just pick up the conversation we were having before about Birmingham?
Okay. You want to be the new Birmingham?
This is all started. I think John's sort of opening panel was talking about how do we make Oxford and the creative industries in Oxford more visible. And so I was sort of reflecting on the excitement that Birmingham has got around Peaky Blinders and the series and what happened there. What tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, I don't know massively, but I do know the guy who wrote it. He's local guys, local stories, and he's, you know, got the exposure he needed to really, you know, make it into something. Yeah, it's a great series, isn't it? And it's sort of created that buzz all around that area. They're building a whole complex of film studios. There's going to be, I don't know, I went up there to see it. There's sort of like the local pub, which is a real pub for everybody in the houses, on shoot days becomes like the set. So it's all like a theme park almost. You know, you can walk through it in sort of periods, you know, set up in the right look. I don't know if it's the right thing of sort of saying how could Oxford be the new Birmingham. That doesn't work for me.
Obviously, no, but it's, what is there that we could do with Oxford that can make the city more visible? And I'm talking specifically, obviously, about the creative industries.
So that's interesting because it's about representative voices.
Yeah,
That is the community of Birmingham
new
telling
voice,
their
isn't it?
story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
So someone was talking about that co-creation element, that feeling, that sense of ownership about the city that becomes what you're proud of.
Yeah.
And it's sort of one, I mean, and I think this brings back perhaps that aspect of diversity that keeps on coming back in every single panel, that is not, I feel, is not strong enough in the city of Oxford, that has got a wide range of communities, a wide range of ethnicities, but it seems to appear only at certain times. And, you know, the Carnival is one example, and then it gets somehow buried. So those communities are not visible in many ways. And so they don't really feel part of that community.
That's a very ancient dichotomy in Oxford, though, isn't it? I mean, the town and garden
Totally.
for
You're absolutely right.
centuries. So